The food crisis isn't just an exaggerated fear, whether you believe it or not. I certainly do. It feels like over the past few years, there's been a massive hidden conspiracy slowly creeping across China's rural areas. After 40 years of rapid economic development since the reform and opening up, people's incomes have skyrocketed from a few hundred yuan to tens of thousands. But look at the farmers. Grain prices have only increased sevenfold since 1985, and in the past decade, those prices have barely changed at all. Meanwhile, the cost of fertilizers and production expenses have increased dozens of times, drastically cutting farmers' profits and essentially forcing them to abandon their land. At the same time, rural schools are being shut down, and young people are being encouraged to move to the cities and buy homes, leaving no one to continue farming. This woman pointed out that while food prices in China have remained low in recent years, the cost of agricultural production has been steadily rising. The increase in prices for fertilizers, seeds, and fuel has directly impacted farmers' profits. Additionally, the Chinese government has encouraged young people to move to cities for work and buy homes, leading to a loss of labor in rural areas and a decline in agricultural output. Who's going to farm the land in the future? The generation born in the 80s doesn't want to farm. Those born in the 90s don't even know how. And the generation born in the 2000s can't tell the difference between wheat and chives, let alone between radishes and ginseng. Is this the fault of the younger generation? Nowadays, those who are still farming are people in their 40s, 50s, or even their 60s and 70s. The government is encouraging young people to pursue agriculture, claiming it has a future. But can this future really put food on the table? In many places, farming income is low, the market is unstable, and there are natural disasters to contend with. Farmers can barely feed themselves, let alone their families. As a result, more and more land is being left uncultivated, and in a few decades, even the villages themselves might slowly disappear. The question of who will farm the land in the future is one that none of us can escape. She further highlighted that young people today show little interest in farming. This is mainly due to the low income, hard labor, and high economic risks associated with agriculture. The ongoing exodus from rural areas has worsened the situation, with many young people choosing city jobs over returning to farm life. As a result, large areas of farmland have been abandoned, negatively affecting food production. Against the backdrop of China's worsening economic crisis, shrinking farmland, and strained relations with Western food suppliers, the country is now facing a serious food security crisis. Economist Lu Linyuan recently warned that a food crisis could break out by the end of this year or early next year, lasting not only a year, but up to 3 to 5 years. He predicted that food prices could skyrocket far beyond what people imagine, which would severely impact everyday life. His warning has sparked widespread concern. Many are now wondering if China is on the verge of another food crisis, similar to the one in the early 1960s. Even pro-CCP experts are becoming pessimistic, raising fears that a situation like the Great Famine may be looming. Reports from the 1960s indicate that the Great Famine was triggered by Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward, which forced rural workers to abandon farming and focus on steel production. As a result, crops were left unharvested, leading to a severe food shortage that lasted for 5 years. Former senior journalist for China's main state-owned news agency, Xinhua, Yang Jisheng, revealed that at least 20 million people in rural China died of starvation during this time, with some areas even witnessing incidents of cannibalism. Liu, who previously held a position in China's Ministry of Finance, is known for his pro-CCP stance. Some believe this makes his warning about an impending food crisis particularly credible. However, others remain skeptical of his outlook. Meanwhile, the Chinese government has been actively buying and stockpiling grain from around the world, which some believe has contributed to rising global food prices. According to The Economist, China's large-scale grain purchases, combined with a pandemic, geopolitical tensions, and last year's heavy rains, have worsened the global wheat shortage. To address these challenges, China has resorted to two main strategies. one of which is stockpiling food. The U.S. Department of Agriculture estimates that by mid-year, China will control 69% of the world's corn reserves, 60% of its rice reserves, and 51% of global wheat reserves. However, it's unclear if this massive stockpile will truly benefit the general population. In recent years, Chinese President Xi Jinping has repeatedly emphasized the importance of food security and has pushed for increased domestic food production. Analysts believe this is in preparation for potential future crises, such as natural disasters or international tensions that could disrupt food imports. Xi famously said, "The rice bowl of the Chinese people must be firmly held in our own hands, and it must be filled with Chinese grain." The People's Daily, China's official state newspaper, reported that Xi has also promoted the concept of a big food strategy. During a visit to Guangdong in April, Xi stressed the need for a comprehensive approach to food security. China has put forward the Blue Granary strategy, which aims to improve the output and quality of marine aquatic products and develop marine ranching. In March, during a trip to Hunan, Xi reiterated the importance of a big agricultural and food strategy, urging the development of specialized agriculture and the expansion of food processing industries to boost agricultural industrialization. So what exactly is Xi's big food strategy? According to reports, it emphasizes food as a foundation for national security and calls for diversifying food sources to ensure both quantity and quality, while also taking food safety seriously. Overseas economist Wei Ping Qin noted in an interview with Radio Free Asia that the Chinese government's primary focus is on ensuring the stability of its regime, and food security plays a crucial role in maintaining that. Qin warned that a major food crisis could pose a serious threat to the government's control. In Qin's view, Xi's big food strategy echoes the traditional Chinese notion of relying on natural resources for survival. The state media's repeated emphasis on this strategy underscores the growing severity of China's food security challenges. Public data reveals that in 2020, China produced 560 million tons of its four main crops: corn, wheat, rice, and soybeans, while the country's total demand for these crops reached 697 million tons, leaving a significant gap of 137 million tons. China's corn and soybean supply, in particular, is heavily reliant on imports. Official statistics show that China became the world's largest corn importer in 2021, with imports exceeding 28 million tons, a staggering 152% increase from 2020. In 2022, China set another record by importing $42 billion of agricultural products from the United States alone. In January of this year, China's State Council Information Office held a press conference announcing that the country would import 160 million tons of grain in 2023, marking an 11.7% year-on-year increase. Soybean imports alone reached 99.41 million tons, up 11.4% from the previous year, and accounted for more than 60% of all grain imports. A November 2023 report from the London-based Center for Economic Policy Research highlighted that the surge in China's agriculture imports has sent shockwaves through global markets. In addition to being the world's largest importer of agricultural products, China has been actively acquiring overseas farmland in countries such as the U.S., South America, Asia, and Africa. China is also losing large amounts of arable land due to pollution and overuse. A 2021 study revealed that by the end of 2019, China's total farmland area had shrunk to about 490,000 square kilometers, a nearly 6% decline over the previous decade. Qin believes these figures underscore the seriousness of China's food security crisis. He suggests that Xi Jinping's concept of a big food strategy is a subtle warning, urging people to be less selective about their food choices and prepare for the possibility of relying on alternatives beyond the traditional four staple crops. Qin also noted that even official data indicates China's food security is far from guaranteed. The country's severe income inequality and large low-income population only add to the risk of a food crisis. Looking back at history, Qin warned that if the economy continues to deteriorate, the tragic famines of the past could happen again. At that point, food security would become a public issue and a political threat to the government. Recently, there have been reports of people dying from hunger across various regions of China. For example, a top university graduate in Beijing was found dead from starvation in her rental apartment in Xi'an. In Shandong's Jiaozhou, a delivery driver discovered a malnourished child who had fainted from hunger. Even in Dongguan, one of Guangdong's most industrialized cities, there were reports of people dying from hunger on the streets. In rural areas, many farmers have been forced into homelessness, facing dire conditions. U.S.-based commentator Heng He argues that Xi Jinping's big food strategy is largely symbolic and lacks practical solutions. He suggests that Xi's approach portrays him as a central figure in addressing food security and diversity. Yet in reality, the success in meeting people's food needs over the years has been the result of market liberalization, not government planning, which has consistently failed. Heng pointed out that China's collectivized economy in the 1950s and 1960s led to the Great Famine. After the Cultural Revolution, when the government allowed farmers to return to semi-privatized farming, the food supply and diversification issues were quickly resolved. Heng believes that trying to address these problems through a planned economy, as Xi's strategy implies, is impractical. The market, not central planning, is key to solving China's food security challenges. Heng argues that resolving China's food crisis fundamentally requires two things: market-driven solutions and land privatization. Currently, all land in China is state-owned, and citizens only have usage rights. Land privatization has yet to be addressed, and local governments have exacerbated the problem by seizing farmland for real estate development, leaving much of it idle. The rapid urbanization in China has also contributed to the shrinking amount of arable land, threatening the country's food security. China's growing demand for food imports has significantly impacted global farmland use and is one of the main drivers of global deforestation, accounting for up to 2/3 of the world's deforested areas. The loss of farmland to other uses, the urbanization of rural areas, and shifting dietary patterns are all complex factors that could pose even greater challenges to China's food security in the coming decade. Kieran Mansell, a professor of food, agricultural, and biological engineering and water quality specialist at Ohio State University, explained that China was still self-sufficient in food production in 2000. However, over the past 20 years, that has changed, partly due to the shrinking amount of agricultural land. Much of this land has been repurposed for urban development or factories. Mansell noted, in the past 10 years, China has lost 5% of its farmland, which is an unsustainable rate for a country of its size. World Bank data from 2021 shows that China's per capita farmland is less than 1/3 that of Brazil and only 1/6 of what the United States has. According to Chinese state media, China's agricultural production is facing a serious bottleneck. The country is grappling with insufficient farmland, small-scale farms, and a lack of both farmers and modern agricultural technology, which is limiting growth in crop yields. Soil degradation and pollution have severely restricted China's ability to expand arable land. The government in Beijing has repeatedly emphasized the importance of protecting the nation's fertile land. To address the issue, a 4-year soil survey is set to be completed by 2025. The last survey, conducted in 2014, revealed that 40% of China's farmland had been degraded due to the overuse of chemical pesticides and heavy metal pollution. In response, China has invested millions in researching ways to grow crops like rice in desert regions such as Inner Mongolia and Xinjiang. The goal is to transform sand into arable soil and cultivate salt-resistant crops. While promising, industry experts caution that this strategy will take time and require significant investments in fertilizers, irrigation, and biotechnology. One major challenge is that most of China's farms are small and run by older farmers who often cannot afford or operate modern agricultural technologies, such as drone sprayers, high-yield seeds, or big data and artificial intelligence tools. The average farm in China is only 0.65 hectares compared to 187 hectares in the US and 60 hectares in Germany. A report by agricultural experts at a recent economic development forum revealed that China's soybean self-sufficiency rate dropped from 62.4% in 2000 to just 16.6% in 2020. Official data shows that China's labor and land costs for grain production are significantly higher than those in the U.S. For example, the cost of growing wheat per acre in China is nearly 1,000 yuan compared to just 318 yuan in the U.S., more than 3 times higher. Moreover, China's younger generation, particularly recent college graduates, are gravitating towards better paying and more attractive jobs in cities. Given the choice, many would prefer higher income positions. Although the government has tried to encourage young people to work in rural areas, the ongoing retirement of older farmers is leaving industries like agriculture and truck transportation with severe labor shortages. This trend, unlikely to reverse anytime soon, is expected to impact agricultural productivity and the distribution resources. Caitlin Welsh, director of the Global Food and Water Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, commented, "For the foreseeable future, China will need to rely on trade for some portion of its production." As China grows wealthier and more urbanized, its food consumption patterns are shifting. Welsh told Voice of America that Chinese consumers are now opting for more expensive foods, including higher amounts of animal protein, fruits, and vegetables, foods that are increasingly challenging to produce. Additionally, food safety concerns in China have become more pressing in recent years. Despite China's implementation of the food safety law in 2009, a 2011 study published in the Chinese journal Food and Hygiene revealed that over 94 million people still suffer from foodborne illnesses annually, with around 8,500 deaths each year. At this year's 3.15 Gala, an annual show produced by China Central Television, focusing on the protection of consumers' rights, 20 different food industry issues were exposed, including reports of sausages being made from dog food ingredients, sparking widespread public concern. Commentator Heng He argued that the Chinese government holds significant responsibility for the country's food safety problems. The government has not effectively fulfilled its duties, and a lack of law enforcement further exacerbates the issue. Despite the introduction of food safety regulations, they are rarely implemented, reflecting a broader issue tied to the breakdown of law and order in society. Meanwhile, extreme weather conditions have led to crop failures in China, causing vegetable prices to soar, with many consumers saying the rising costs are becoming unbearable. The New York Times reported on September 3rd that after weeks of drought, farmers in northern China, usually a dry region, were unprepared for the heavy rains that hit earlier in the summer. The struggling floods wiped out crops such as eggplant, cucumbers, and cabbage. In Shijiazhuang, located 290 kilometers from Beijing, consecutive days of rain along with overflowing reservoirs turned fertile land into unusable muddy fields. Changing weather patterns across the country have left farmers scrambling to adapt as floods hit southern China 2 months earlier than usual before spreading to typically dry northern and eastern provinces. Vegetable prices across the country have skyrocketed, with some increasing by as much as 40%, reaching their highest levels in 5 years. These price hikes are particularly difficult for consumers already struggling amid China's slowing economy. Despite these challenges, the Chinese government continues to export large quantities of vegetables to Russia, a country currently facing international isolation. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Shouguang in Shandong province exports up to 500,000 tons of vegetables annually to Russia, including tomatoes, bell peppers, and carrots. These shipments pass through the Manzhouli and Suifenhe port borders. This has led some to question the Chinese government's food policies and its priorities when allocating resources. Critics argue that the government should focus on addressing domestic food shortages rather than sending resources abroad. Zhongyuan Zhou, senior fellow for China Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations, warned that in a weakened economy, if food prices continue to rise for an extended period, it will severely damage household spending power. The New York Times also noted that extreme weather events are particularly sensitive issues for the Chinese leadership. Historically, famines in China have triggered unrest, and the government has long prioritized food security as a critical policy focus. Experts suggest that in the long term, the Chinese government will face even greater challenges in maintaining food security. In late July, Xi Jinping convened an urgent meeting of the Politburo Standing Committee. According to state media reports, Xi delivered a clear message: minimize agricultural losses and ensure national food security. However, some analysts believe that despite Xi's urgency, his efforts may not be enough. They argue that China's ruling party is already entering what Chinese netizens call the garbage time of history, referring to the ending period of a regime or a political and economic system.